My background is as a primary school teacher, so it was a great delight to me to get to write Victoria's sexuality education curriculum resource for children from prep through to 6th grade. So one of the jobs that I do is go around and train teachers on how to talk to children about sexuality. And I'm going to use an activity that I like to do with children and teachers with you now. It will be quite challenging. Can you name some body parts that both boys and girls have? Come on.
Nipples.
Oh, why do you always start with that? Oh, fabulous. Oh, you guys are good. You first graders? All right. I think we could go on for a long time, but what if I was to ask you to name some bits that only girls have? How would you feel then? Do we have any offerings?
Vulva.
Top of the class. Okay. If I pressed you for a few more suggestions?
Ovaries.
Oh, we've gone to internal organs, eh? That's excellent. I'm very impressed. How about boys' bits?
Penis.
Now, here's my next question for you. It's very easy though. How did it feel naming these bits?
Easy.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. What was the feeling when I started asking you for these bits? It is embarrassing and it creates anxiety, and not just for children, but it creates anxiety for teachers and for parents as well. And it's a fundamental part of sexuality education. But there's a side effect of not being able to name those parts. And the side effect is an incapacity to have an open discussion about these issues. And so the purpose of sexuality education is at the very least to enable us to talk about these issues together. So that's children. Now the other opportunity that we take when we're teaching children about this issue is to say it is to acknowledge those difficult feelings, because we live in a culture where it is awkward to talk about these parts. That's what we've learned. It's not the same in other parts of the world necessarily, but that's how it is here. But this school and your parents believe it's really important that you know how your whole body works. And so we're going to create a time and a place where you can learn about these parts from us. And so the very important tune that we're singing there is that you can come to us to talk about these issues. And again, if we don't sing that tune, then where do they go for information? The next activity for children in, say, grades 5 and 6, that means they're about ages 10 to 12, is a very simple one that I pinched probably from a family planning book. And it's to have children of those ages work in small groups to identify what do you think will be great about puberty and growing up? What do you think will be tricky? So sometimes you have groups of boys working on their own together or small groups of girls. Any suggestions about the sort of things they'd come up with between the ages of 10 and 12?
Boys with black facial hair.
And some girls too. Do you think they'd think that would be tricky or great?
I think someone thinks it's great.
Yeah, facial hair. Isn't that an interesting one though? Maybe the girls group would put it in that side, right?
Or
Body hair is a very hot topic. Yeah. What else do you think they come up with?
You get tall, height.
Okay. Again, actually that's another interesting one, because I remember as a 12-year-old girl being the tallest and hating it. And then I got to like it. So if we continued with that list, the sort of things that the children say are all of the body changes, anxiety about managing pimples and body odour and periods. Girls talk a lot about worrying about how they manage periods at school. But then they get into other stuff, like they imagine that sex will be great, having children will be great, driving a car, independence, earning money. They're the sorts of things they say. Then on the tricky side, well, actually those things can exist on both sides as well, and that's what they identify. And so this activity provides an opportunity to say that these things can be both difficult and fantastic at the same time. But if we learn particular skills, we can learn how to manage those things so that they're a little less tricky. And the other important lesson that we get out of that is that these are universal experiences, and that when you take your homework sheet home to ask your family about the things that happened to them when they were this age and what they looked forward to and what they thought was tricky, then you bring the family back into the classroom to say, we have all shared this experience. And you've created an opportunity for families and children to talk about this subject as well. Because despite however a marvellous sexuality educator you are, your children may not want to talk about the subject with you. So it's great to have excuses to raise the issue. Now, if we did this activity with children in prep through to second grade, so the 5 to 8 year olds or the 9 to 10 year olds, we would find a list of things that are quite predictable. If you reflect on it, the things that come up of a sexual nature for children in those age groups, and they tend to be things like nudies, behaviour in the toilets, what girls' bits are, what boys' bits are, why they're different from each other. When children get older, by the time they're, say, 8 to 9, they start to become aware of forming different social groups, so that they start to clump in interest groups. Now, the impact of that in terms of sexuality education is that gender starts to become more apparent, so that the boy who doesn't play what all the other boys play might start getting left out of those clumps. And the girl who wants to continue to play a sport that all the other boys play might continue to get left out of those clumps too. So sexuality education provides a wonderful, safe opportunity to say that our biology is different to the people that we are. It's a part of us, but it's not the whole of us, and it doesn't determine everything that we love to do and all of our potential. So that's another really important lesson that we need to sing when we provide sexuality education. And you can see too that if we left sexuality education to just being about bodies, we'd miss all those really important heart things that make a difference to our capacity to manage that aspect of our lives as we get older. Now, if we continued to do this activity with children who are 14 or children who are 16, you would find a whole other set of issues. So the research in Australia from our centre tells us that by year 10, which is 15, 16, 25% of kids have had sexual intercourse. That there's a lot of sexual activity happening by age 14, and that by the end of year 12, 50% have had sexual intercourse. Other numbers have had oral sex without having sexual intercourse. And there are too many people that have experienced unwanted sex of that age. And unwanted sex is a very broad category that ranges from sex I wish I hadn't had to sex I feel really sad about that happened, and that's often to do with alcohol, to forced sex. And so the other significant finding among Australian teenagers is to do with consent and sex. So children not understanding that they have a right to choose who touches their body and when they choose to use their body as well for sexual reasons. So here's how we do sex ed that works. We talk about the things that are relevant and that matter to the young people that we're teaching. And so what's relevant and what matters to teenagers is things to do with the heart and things to do with belonging and things to do with bodies and things to do with sexual pleasure as well. But the tendency is to talk about diseases and contraception. And that's very important information, but it's such a small sliver of what makes sexuality education important and work and make a difference. So if we think about why we're not teaching that stuff, well, it's no one team person's responsibility. First of all, there's the child. They have agency, they have some agency over their destiny, how they interpret this planet we live on and the choices that they make. But there's the child, there's the school, there's media. I didn't say we necessarily always want all these team members, right? But we're all part of the team. There's family. And what was that other one? Oh, let's just say community. I'll say community agencies like pharmacies or doctors. And then finally, let's just include whatever bit of soil all these bits happen to land on, because that makes a difference too. The social environment that these things happen in has an enormous impact on the child's capacity to manage their sexual health and to have a happy time of it. So, when we promote sexuality education, we're not saying schools, you need to do everything, but you have a role to play that's different to family. Family has a role to play too. Children want to hear from their families what they think is important. They may not always follow their parents' advice, but it will be part of their decision-making process, and we as families need to make sure that we let them know. But school is so important as well, because it is providing a place where they talk about these matters among their peers. So they get to check reality amongst their peer group, and that's so important as well. And we again are repeating or singing the tune that you can talk about this topic in this society. We can talk about it and figure out the best way to go forward. If that doesn't happen, then which circle, which bubble gets biggest? Which one takes up the most space? And we know right now which one's taking up the most space. So the antidote to addressing the sexualisation of children and of concerns about kids seeing porn is not for less information, not for trying to stop sexuality and sexual development. It is to talk more about sex, because we're not talking about it very much in a meaningful way at the moment. The final thing I'd say, I guess, is that when a child goes to their local doctor or goes to a pharmacy, can they get the help they need? In fact, they're doing something that's really marvellous. They've been very brave and they've gone to get some information and help. But what we hear of sometimes, of course we hear of many wonderful health agencies and doctors and so on, but we do hear lots of examples of kids being turned away because that particular service provider has trouble providing, has a value difference about providing services to that child. So kids not getting emergency contraception when they go to ask for it and so on. So depending on where you live, if you live in a smaller place with only, say, one pharmacy, it can be very difficult for you to get the help and information that you need. So what makes sex education work is that it's relevant, that we find out what the kids want to know, that we provide training and opportunities to support our teachers in doing it, because they're in the same culture as those kids. And we're not doing that at the moment either. that we provide more space in the PE and health curriculum, so we don't as much. I know obesity is important. I know physical activity is important, but we need a bit of space in there for health and well-being as well. And that, and finally, that the entire team, the whole community, takes this on as a